This conference will now be recorded.
Before I start, I see day by day people are, I'm not sure what is the problem. The number of people who is attending the sessions is gradually decreasing day by day. I hardly see 30% of the overall participants as of now in the sessions, in the regular sessions. Only out of complete strength, I can see only 30% of the people are attending. Remaining 70% people are, I'm not sure what is the issue with them. They may lose the interest in DevOps, or they may have some other concerns, or they may just only looking after the recordings. Why I have to wake up so early? Anyhow, we will get a recording. Let's go through that recording. I am not sure what is their mentality. So Kubernetes is very, very important. Kubernetes will be difficult also compared to the other tools, but it is very, very important. Unless until you attend the session, unless until you practice, it is very difficult for you to learn Kubernetes. So we are here to help you. We are here to explain and help you whenever you are having any issues while practicing Kubernetes. If you don't want to utilize these sessions, we cannot help. We cannot do anything. So it's a suggestion or request for everyone. Make sure you are attending the sessions. Without making an effort, you can't learn anything. No one can feed Kubernetes concepts into your mind overnight, right? You need to have a lot of, you need to spend lot of time, lot of dedication, lot of effort is required. Okay, so you want to become an expert, you need to spend some time. Without spending the time, without attending the sessions, without practicing, you can't learn anything. Okay, it's up to you how you want to utilize these sessions. We are not forcing anyone, because it's, again, I'm saying, it's not a school or college or to scold the children. Everyone is professional here. You want to become a professional, you want to become an expert in DevOps area, you have to attend the sessions, all the sessions, and practice, do the assignments, then only you can learn. If I just join in some course, does it mean you will become an expert? Forget about any institute, whether it's a Mithun Technology, or whether it's a Udemy, or whether it's so and so. That doesn't matter. If you just join the course, if you just pay the course fee, and if you just join the course, will you become an expert? Unless until you have some effort, you spend some time with trainers, you spend some time with practicing assignments, then only you will become an expert, right? Change that mindset and try to attend all the sessions, at least now onwards. Okay, so yesterday we were discussing about Kubernetes concepts like pod, service. At least we discussed about namespace so far. So pod is the smallest building block which we can schedule in Kubernetes. Service is required for what purpose? Service is what? Kubernetes service. In Kubernetes, what is the use of service? To access or to expose the applications for internal and external communication, we are going to create a service. So yesterday, we deployed some applications in the Kubernetes cluster. So I have a Kubernetes cluster. I have a kubectl installed in this machine. I have a kubectl installed in this machine. Let me connect to that machine to execute kubectl commands. So I have these many nodes. I have these many nodes. These many nodes are there. I don't have any pods in the current namespace, default namespace. So I have a pods created in this namespace. As of now, how many pods are running in that namespace? One pod. Yesterday we created a service. For this application. Now I have intentionally deleted my pod yesterday. So these pods are coming up automatically. Now I can access this application because this service has an endpoint. If you see, when I access this service, does at least do we have some pods, do we have some endpoints, basically pods to serve the traffic for this service? Do we have some pods to serve the traffic for this service, Python service? Yes. Now I can access this application from outside. From outside, I can access using that node IP and a node port. That node IP and node port. I'm getting the response. That application is working. Now, if I try to access this service, does this service has any endpoints, any pods which is running as of now? This Java web application. Do I have any service? I mean to say, why we are getting this? This site cannot be reached because does this service has any pods, any endpoints as of now? No. So service will route the traffic to the pods. Service is responsible for accessing the applications, accessing the pods, exposing the pods within the cluster or outside the cluster. Pods are the place where actually our applications are running. As I told yesterday itself, is it recommended to create a pods directly? I told in the yesterday session itself, is it recommended to create the pods directly? No. Why? What is the problem with pods? Pods are ephemeral. Pods are ephemeral. What is the meaning of ephemeral? Pods can live for very short amount of time. Pods can go down for any reason. Pods can go down for any reason. Pods can live for very short amount of time. If we directly create a pods, normal pods, is anyone is looking after those pods? If I directly create a pods, whether that pod is healthy or not, whether it is running or not, does anyone is looking after the pods if we are directly creating a pods in Kubernetes? No. So it is not recommended to create a pods directly. So pod is ephemeral. It will live for very short amount of time and won't be rescheduled if something went wrong. So you should not directly create a pod for deploying the applications in Kubernetes. Now let's say I'm intentionally deleting this pod. I'm intentionally deleting. As of now, this application is working. This Node.js, this Python application is working. Now let's say I'm intentionally deleting this pod, but in real time this can go down for any reason. Now, since the pod is deleted, am I getting the pod automatically? Am I getting the pod automatically now? Do I have any pods now? Do I have any endpoints for that service? Any service. Now, do we have any endpoints? I mean to say any pods for this service to route the traffic? No. Is my application down now? Is my application down? Yes. So pods should not be created directly. For that reason, we have a controllers. I mean to say different Kubernetes objects. How can I say in simple words? Let's say in AWS, we have a EC2, we have a auto scaling. Let's say in AWS, we have a EC2 and we have a auto scaling. Now, if I directly create EC2, if something goes wrong, am I getting a EC2 instance automatically? AWS, let me talk in a AWS perspective. If I directly create EC2, if something goes wrong with EC2, am I getting another EC2 automatically? No. But when I'm creating EC2 with the help of auto scaling concept, ASG, auto scaling group, auto scaling group is looking after your server, whether this server is healthy or not. If this server is unhealthy, is it recreating another server, this auto scaling group in AWS? So similarly in Kubernetes, I have a pod. If I directly create a pod, if something goes wrong with my pod, am I getting another pod? If I'm directly creating a pod, am I creating another pod? No. So we should not create a pods directly. You have some other resources like these: replica sets, deployments, daemon sets, replication controllers, some other resources. If I create a pods with the help of these resources, does these resources will look after your pods, whether it is running or not? If it is not running, if it is deleted, will it be recreated? Does this will look after your pods? Yes. So it is not recommended to directly create a pods. We have to use some controllers in Kubernetes, some other resources. What are the resources we have to manage the pods? We have a replication controller. We have a replica set. We have a daemon set. We have a deployment. We have a stateful set, something like this. Now, again, are we going to create all these for all the applications? Are we going to create replication controller, replica set, daemon set, deployment, stateful set for each and every application which we are going to deploy in Kubernetes? Again, no. You are not going to create all these for each and every application based on the use case, based on the requirement. So widely, what controllers we are going to use to create? Basically only these. We are going to use deployments mostly, or daemon sets, or stateful sets. We are going to widely create deployments or daemon sets or stateful sets. These are the widely used resources to manage the pods. But before I go there, let me explain what is this, what is this, what is this, what is this. We'll slowly understand all these things. Now, let me start with replication controller. Let me start with replication controller. What is replication controller? What it does? So we have one Kubernetes resource called replication controller. So replication controller is one of the key feature of Kubernetes. Replication controller is one of the key feature of Kubernetes. What is the responsibility of this replication controller? What is the responsibility of this replication controller? If you see here, which is responsible for managing the pod life cycle. Replication controller is responsible for managing the pod life cycle. What is the meaning of pod life cycle? It can be creating, managing, deleting. It can be creation. Using replication controller, we can create the pods. And will those pods will be managed by that replication controller? Manage. If I delete that replication controller, is it going to delete whatever pods which is managing? Whatever pods which is managed by that replication controller, that pods will be deleted. So this replication controller is responsible for managing the pod lifecycle, and it will make sure that specified number of pod replicas are running at any point of time. It is responsible for making sure that the specified number of pods are always running at any point of time. And also, using replication controller, can I create multiple pods? I mean to say multiple replicas. Can I create a multiple pods? I mean to say multiple replicas of that pod. Instead of one replica, one pod, I wanted to have a 2 pods or 3 pods. We can have a multiple replicas created. We can create multiple pods. Then what that replication controller does? It will make sure that those many replicas are always exist. If pod goes down, what replication controller does? For some reason, whatever pod is created by replication controller, if that pod goes down, what replication controller does? Will it automatically recreate, reschedule that pod? It will recreate and reschedule that pod, right? Now, if I create a replication controller with the one replica, it will ensure that always one pod is available. Always one pod is available. If I create a replication controller with replica as one, at any point of time, it is going to be available. Suppose I created a replication controller with one pod. If this pod is down in the sense, if this pod is gone, then is it going to replace, I mean to say recreate another pod in place of this pod? Is it going to recreate, I mean to say replace, reschedule, whatever it is? Replace in the sense recreating. If this pod is not healthy, instead of this pod, I will get another pod, whatever you name it. That can be deleting, recreating, rescheduling, whatever it is. So replication controller will manage your pod life cycle. If something goes wrong with your pod, is it going to recreate another pod? I can call it as a recreate. I can call it as a replacement. If something is not performing well, it is going to replace with other, right? So replication controller will manage your pod life cycle. Now, how to create a replication controller? How to create a replication controller? Again, do I need to request my API server to create a replication controller? Again, do I need to request by creating a manifest file? Can I request my API server to create a replication controller? Yes. So again, imperative, declarative. I don't want to use imperative going onwards. I will use only declarative. So declarative in the sense, can I create a manifest file, Kubernetes manifest file? Can I have a Kubernetes manifest file in which I will define the replication controller and its properties? So I can write a manifest file in which I can define my replication controller. So in case of pod, we directly created a pod something like this. We directly created a pod something like this. Now, is it recommended to directly create a pod for any application? Whether it's a Python app or anything, is it recommended to create a pod like this directly? No. Instead of this, I can go for any of these. I can go for any of these based on the requirement. Now, I want to create a replication controller. What is the root attributes or what is the properties of Kubernetes manifest? API version, kind, metadata, spec. Now kind, I don't want to create a pods directly, but I want to create a pods with the help of replication controller. So what should be my kind here? Now I'm trying to create a replication controller. What is my kind? Replication controller. What is the API version for replication controller? What is the API version? I have given one table here. I have given one table here for your reference also. So if you see kind pod API version is v1. If it is kind replication controller, what is the API version for replication controller? v1. For service, what is the version? API version. For service, what is the API version? v1. Like this, I have given a table. Otherwise, how can I see what are the resources and its API version in Kubernetes? How can I see that? We discussed one command already. How can I see that? Can I use this kubectl API resources? API resources kubectl API resources. Now we have all these are Kubernetes resources. All these are Kubernetes resources. But if you see this one, replication controller, replication controller, this replication controller, this one, kind is replication controller. What is the API version of replication controller? What is the API version of replication controller here? v1. In the short form, what we call that replication controller? In the short form, RC stands for what? In the short form, RC stands for replication controller. Now, API version for replication controller is v1. Metadata. So here, whatever name I am going to give, this name is for what? Whatever name I am going to give here, is this name will be your pod name, service name, or replication controller name? This replication controller name. Let's say something like this, whatever. Now here, I can give a labels. These labels are for what? Whatever I am going to give a labels, these labels are for what? Is these labels are for my pods which I am going to create, or these labels are for replication controller? This metadata is for this. This metadata is for this object. So whatever name I am going to give, this name is for replication controller. Whatever labels I am going to give here, this is going to be for replication controller, not for your pods. Not for your pods. This metadata is for this resource. This name is not going to be your pod name. Whatever labels I am going to add here, those will not be added to your pods. These are labels for this object. This is the name for this object. But these labels are optional. You are not going to use these labels anywhere. These are optional. Now, where can I define my pod information? I am creating a replication controller. Replication controller will create and manage what? Replication controller will create and manage what? Pods. So where can I define that pod information? Where can I define that pod information? Can I define that under this specification, this replication controller specification? Yes. So here I can have something like this: replicas, replicas, number of pod replicas, number of pod replicas. This is my replica name. I mean to say RC name, whatever you want to give. Now something like this. Then you have a template, one more attribute called template. What is this template? This is your pod template. This is your pod template. So now can I define this information under that template? I created a pod like this. Now can I have this information under my pod template? Pod template. So this template is nothing but a pod template, pod specification. For this replication controller, you are defining the pod information. So under this template again you have a metadata. Under this template again you have a metadata, you have a spec. Now this metadata is for what? Here you have one metadata, here you have another metadata, here you have a spec, here you have a spec. So this metadata and spec, this is for what? This is for your pod. Now here I can give some name, I can give labels. Now whatever labels I am defining here, will these labels will be attached? Will these labels will be attached to your pods, whatever I am defining here? Now yes. Now under this spec, under pod template we have a spec. Under this spec, can I have this section like containers? Can I have this information? This is pod spec. Can I have something like this? Now containers, name, name of the container, image, from which image you want to create this, ports, container port, something like some name, you can give. Now I can define this one. So in YML, already you know what is YML. I explained already. In YML, what is this stands for? Whether it's a Docker Compose, whether it's a Ansible, whether it's anything. What is this hyphen stands for in YML, guys? List or array. List or array. So you may have a question, sir, why ports is array? Because if I have some containers, that container might be running on 2 ports. In that case, do I need to use this, repeat this for one more time? Suppose let's take Jenkins. Jenkins is running on port 80 and also it is running on 50,000. Let's say that is a JNLP port, slave port. So can I mention that here like 8080 web port and 50,000 that JNLP slave port like this? So any YML, what is this hyphen stands for? Check the compose file or any other file. So this represents basically list or array. Now this is one information. Let's say, can I repeat this section for one more time? Suppose I want to have a multi-container pods. Both are container ports only. Container can run on multiple ports, right? You can define just something like this. If container is running on multiple ports, like this. Something like this. If your container are having something like this. If you would like to give a name for this also, you can give something like this. Name, web port. If you want to give name for this, you can say name, web port, name, slave port, something like this. Something like this, right? So you can define the ports, container port. Now let's say I want to have a multi-container pod. Can I repeat this section? Can I repeat this section like this? Here, we can create a replication controller. The replication controller will use which information to create the pods. I'm creating a replication controller. This replication controller will create and manage the pods. This replication controller use what information? Is it going to use this information, whatever we have defined under template, to create the pods? Yes. Now, this replication controller also will manage the pods using selectors. Now, here for replication controller, at least this is optional, I can give a selector. So what is this selector? What is this selector? Whatever labels we have given, for this part, that will be given as a selector here, but it is not mandatory. It is optional for replication controller. So internally, what replication controller will use to see whether whatever parts I created, whether it is healthy or not, whether it is running or not. What internally it will use? Is it again going to use these labels of your pods to look after whether those pods are healthy or not, running or not? Yes. So internally it will use the same concept. Now I want to create a replication controller. Now in real time you can use IDEs. You can use IDEs like this, right? You can use IDEs like this. Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code has a plugins also, Kubernetes plugins also. In Visual Studio Code, you can go to the extensions. You can go to the extensions. You can install some Kubernetes plugins. You can install some Kubernetes plugins. You can search and install some Kubernetes plugins. So what it does, right? It will help us to generate some kind of a templates. I have installed some plugins already here. Now let's say if I try to type, let me show that what I am doing. Control N, new file. I am selecting a language as YML. I have some plugins already. If you see, when I'm typing REP, is it showing some tooltip, some helper? Because I already have some plugins here. I installed some plugins. If I click on this now, is it generated that specification, that standard specification template? API version v1 kind is this, replica, selector, template. Now can I fill these values as per my requirement now? Let's say Java web app RC, right? Replicas, I want to say 2 replicas, app, Java web app. I can fill these values. Something like this. Java web app, whatever, from which image you want to create. I want to create this one from this image. something like this. Now I can use this manifest. Now if I create replication controller with this information, how many pods will be created? How many replicas will be created for this replication controller? Two replicas. Two replicas. Now if I don't mention this, I am removing this. By default, how many replicas will be created? One replica. So it is going to create based on the number of replicas we are given here. So it is going to create two pods. Using which information? Is it going to use this information, whatever I have defined under template? Is it going to use this information to create those pods? This information, your pod template, pod specification. So it is going to create two pods, and that pod will have, each pod will have how many containers as per my pod template, as per my pod specification? So if I create two pods, each pod will have how many containers as per my specification? One. Each pod will have a one container. Now multi-container pods. Multi-container pods. If I define something like this, is it going to create 4 pods or 2 pods only? Let's say, is it going to create 4 pods or 2 pods? Only 2 pods. But each pod will have how many containers? If I use some other image, each pod will have how many containers? Each pod will have a 2 containers. That is what pod, right? Pod can have a 1 or more containers. Pod can have 1 or more containers. Pod is a basic unit of scheduling in Kubernetes. Pod can have 1 or more containers, but instead of creating a pods directly, we are using controllers to create and manage the pods. Now, in my pod specification, how many containers I have defined as of now? 1. So it is going to create 2 pods. Each pod will have how many containers? Each pod will have a, now I removed that other section. Each pod will have how many containers now? One container. Okay, single container pods. Now I can use this manifest file. Guys, when you are learning Kubernetes, don't use IDEs. Don't use IDEs. When you are learning Kubernetes, you have better you type from beginning itself, something like this. Better you type from on your own. Don't use that any kind of plugins or IDEs, so that you can understand what is what. It is giving tool tips, but I don't want to use, so that you can understand what is what. You start typing like this, the way I have typed, so that you can easily understand what you are doing. If you use this kind of editors, it will pre-populate some standard template. You can fill the values. These type of editors, plugins you can use once you are good in Kubernetes, because sometimes in the interview they are going to ask, can you write a replication controller manifest? Can you write a service manifest? Can you write deployment manifest? In that case, if you keep typing, will it be easy for you to write a manifest? If they ask in the interview, you can explain what is this, what is this, what is this, what is this. So it will be easy when you are practicing manually. Now, as of now, do I have any replication controllers created in that namespace? In that namespace, do I have any replication controllers created? Do I have any RC? Short form RC, full form replication controller. We don't have. Now I can create. In my manifest, I have not mentioned the namespace here. I have not mentioned the namespace here. So in which namespace it will be created if I don't mention namespace here? Under my metadata, I am not saying this replication controller has to be created in which namespace. The kubectl is pointing to some namespace. Whatever namespace kubectl is pointing by default. By default, it is pointing to which namespace as of now? Default namespace. Now, even though I don't mention here, while applying, while executing this command, while executing this kubectl apply command, apply -f that file name, can I use this option? Even though I don't mention in my manifest file, even though I don't mention in my manifest file in that, the namespace like this, I have not mentioned like this. Can I, even though I don't explicitly mention, can I say something like this while applying also if required? Yes, you can do that. Okay. Now, let me define in the manifest itself, in the YML itself. This is my manifest. Now, do I already have a service, guys? Do I already have a service? That service is having this as a selector. Do we already, not this one, I think. Service is not having this as a selector. Service is having the selector as what? I think run. Keys run, right? Keys run. I will change the service also now. I will change the service also. Okay, that is fine. Now, I'm giving something like this. Now let me represent service also here. Last time I created a service using imperatively. Now I want to create service using declaratively. In same YML file, can I have a service also defined by using 3 dashes separating each resource? So I want to create a service. So service, let me give service name as Java Web App SVC. Now, whatever labels I have given for my pod, can I take that label as a selector here? Whatever labels I have given for my pod, I will take that as a selector here. So type, what is the default type? Even though the type is not defined here, what is the default type? The type is not defined. What is the default type? Cluster IP. If I want to create node port, can I say something like this? Node port, type node port, port mapping. So service port 80, target port 8080. Now in which namespace I want to create this one again? In which namespace my pods are scheduled? In which namespace my replication controller is created and its pods will be created? In this namespace. So I'm creating a service also. In which namespace? In this namespace. Now this service is already created using imperatively. So this service is already created imperatively, but this service has a different selector. I can update this service. Instead of creating this service, can I update this service also? Can I update this service selector instead of creating a completely new service? We can edit, right? but I want to show everything from imperatively. I want to reuse this port. So let me delete this service. I am deleting this service which is created imperatively. I want to reuse this port, right? Now, when I am creating a service of type node port, there is a one more option here, node port. There is a one more option here, node port. I can explicitly mention on which port I need to expose this service, on which node port I want to expose this service. If I don't mention also explicitly like this, on which range the port will be assigned by Kubernetes, if I don't mention explicitly like this, also Kubernetes will assign. On which range Kubernetes will assign this node port when I'm going to create a node port service? 30,000 to 32,767. Can I have two services on same node port, guys? Suppose I am trying to explicitly mention, can I use this port again? Already I have one service. Let's say this one. Can I use this port again? Can I use like this? Again, I already have this service running on this one. No. Node port should be unique for each service. Pawan is asking, do we need to open in AWS security group? If you don't open, will you able to access that? That AWS concept is different, Kubernetes concept is different. If you don't open that port in AWS security group, will you able to reach that port on that server firewall? No, right? Now, I am not explicitly mentioned that node port. Does Kubernetes will assign some port in that range, whatever is available, it will assign. Now let me take this YML. I am saying something like this. So I am using editor. So when I try to copy paste, you don't see some indentation problems. But if I type same thing in a normal notepad, and if I try to copy paste from notepad to this shell, sometimes these indentations will be not correct. Okay. Now this is my manifest. Now, is there any way I can validate this manifest whether it is correct or not? In Docker Compose, we have some command to validate the compose file. Here in Kubernetes also, do you have some option to see whether that YML is proper or not? In Kubernetes, you can do the dry run. kubectl apply -f that YML. I can use this option -, dry run equals to client. You can use client or server. What is the meaning of client and what is the meaning of server? When I use dry run equals to client, does this request goes to the API server for validating that YML? Does the request goes to the API server to validate this YML when I use client? No. It will be validated within client itself, within kubectl itself. The kubectl itself will validate. The kubectl itself will validate whether that is proper or not. If I use server, does the request goes to API server and it will validate authentication, authorization, then it is going to validate all those YMLs are correct or not, right? So we can do the dry run. I can mention something like this, dry run. So dry run, what they are trying to say, this dry run is deprecated, can be replaced with client. They are going to deprecate this option with server. Now I can use something like this, client. Now dry run, it is saying created, but a dry run. Is it actually created or it has just validated whether that YML is correct or not. I'm using this option dry run. So is it actually created? Is this replication controller, is this service actually created? No. It is just validating that manifest. Suppose, let me do some mistakes. Now, instead of replicas, let's say I'm saying something like this. Instead of replicas, I'm typing something else. Now, when I do the dry run, is it saying this YML has a error validation, unknown field, this field under replication controller specification? Under replication controller specification, this is unknown field. So it will validate. Now, if I don't follow indentation properly, is this correct? Now here, is this correct? Here or anywhere? Is this correct? Now, when I try to do the dry run, is it saying there is an issue at line number 18? Parsing error, YML parsing error, right here. Now let's say here I am not following indentation. Now let me do the dry run. This is this replication controller is fine, but do you have a problem with the service? This replication controller, that is fine. Do we have a problem with service? It is saying line number 5, but actually do we have a problem here, line number 5 here, or this object line number 5? Don't get confused with those line numbers if you have a multiple resources. Now it is saying problem at line number 5, but is it really a problem at this line number 5? Do I really have a problem at here? No. So this object line number 5, this object line number 5. So do I have a problem here? Yes, right? So let me update that. Now I can do the dry run. Is everything perfect now in my manifest? Yes. Now, how can I apply? I want to actually create. Can I remove this option, dry run option, and apply so that it will be actually created now? Yes. So in manifest itself, I have mentioned the namespace. In manifest itself, I have mentioned the namespace. So now the service and replication controller will be created in which namespace now? In the test namespace. Now if you see, now if you see, what is this now? What is this? How many replication controllers I have as of now? How many replication controllers I have as of now in this namespace? Replication controllers. How many replication controllers? Do I have 2 replication controller or 1 replication controller? How many replication controllers I have as of now? Only 1 replication controller. 1 replication controller. So what is this? Desired to, current to, ready to. This is 1 replication controller. What is this desired to, current to, ready to? This replication controller, how many replicas we are expecting for this replication controller? How many replicas we are expecting? How many replicas we are expecting? Desired. How many replicas we are expecting for this replication controller? 2. So this 2 is nothing but what? 2 pods. 2 pods. Desired 2, current 2. We are expecting 2. Currently, how many pods are there for this replication controller? Currently 2 pods are there. Those pods also up and running. Now, Who created these pods and who is managing these pods now, these two pods? If you see the naming conventions also, if you see the naming conventions, whatever name I have given here under template, under metadata, I have given something like this. These pods are created with this name, if you observe. These pods are created with that name, if you observe. No. Why? Because replication controller can have more than one pod, but can we have a multiple pods with same name in that namespace? Can we have a two pods with same name? No. So that's why whatever pods are created by your these resources, if you see the naming standards, do you see the pod name is something like this? Your replication controller name hyphen some alphanumeric random character. By looking at these two pods, what can you understand? Can you understand this replication controller is managing these pods now? Now we created a service also. We created a service also. Now service has how many endpoints now? This service, this Java web app service, that service has how many endpoints now? If you see, how many endpoints I have? Two. We have two endpoints for that service. How come we have two endpoints? Because service has a selector of what? Service has a selector like app, Java web app. With those selectors, how many pods it is able to find? How many pods it is able to find? So how many pods we have with that label? Now service has a selector. As of now, how many pods we have with that label? If you see, two pods. Now service has two endpoints. Service is different, replication controller is different. So if something goes wrong with your pods, if pod is down, is service is going to recreate and manage the pods, guys? The service will recreate the pods. The service will manage your pods if something goes wrong with your pods? No. Service will not do anything. Service is primarily for what? Service is used only for a communication. Service will identify the pods and service will route the traffic to the pods. Service discovery and load balancing. But who will look after your pods now? If something goes wrong with your pod, who will look after your pods now? I'm intentionally deleting one of the pod. 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 If you see, after some time, immediately you can see that pod will be recreated. Do you see? Again, I got a pod automatically. Who created this pod? Who replicated this pod again? That RC. Is it doing the desired state reconciliation? Is it trying to match the desired number of replicas with actual number of replicas in the cluster? Is it doing the desired state reconciliation? We are expecting 2. If this is gone, if this is gone or this is gone, actual will become 1. We are expecting 2, actual is 1. So will it again try to match with the desired number of replicas? Is it going to reschedule or recreate, whatever you name it? Is it going to recreate, reschedule, replace the pods again to match the desired state? So this way, now is my pods are available all the time? Instead of directly creating a pods, Instead of directly creating a pods, if I use these resources, does pods will be highly available? If something goes wrong, will the pods are getting recreated, rescheduled? No. With this way, using this, is my pods are not highly available. If something goes wrong with your pod, are you not getting pods automatically? Is your pods are not available? Now, I am intentionally deleting these pods, this one and this one. Since we are having a replication controller to replicate these pods, am I getting the pods automatically? I am intentionally deleting, but in real time, the pod can go down for any reason. Now, even though I deleted the pods, again, is your pods are getting recreated, rescheduled? Now, if you see, which means is a replication controller is managing your pod life cycle. Now, yes, right? Now, to access this service, to access these pods, do I have a service within the cluster? Can I use this service name within the cluster? If I want to access this application, can I use this service name within the cluster? Now, since this service has multiple endpoints, does it act as a load balancing within the Kubernetes? Will it does the load balancing between these two pods within the cluster? If this service has multiple endpoints, it will does the load balancing within the cluster. Now, from outside, can I use that node IPs and node ports to access from outside? This from outside, can I use node IP and node port? Don't be hurry in the answer. Don't say no again yes. Don't say first no again yes. Listen the question properly. From outside the cluster, if I want to access, can I use this node port and node IP, whatever IP, any node IP? So any node IP, if I open that port in the firewall, if the port is not open, AWS concept, AWS concept. Let's say this one. Now, if you see, am I able to access that application via service from outside? Now, since I have more replicas, more pods, even though one of the pod went down, do you still have one more pod to serve my traffic? Let's say I'm intentionally deleting one of the pod. Now service has how many endpoints? Service has how many pods now that service? Service has how many pods? 2 pods, guys. Now as of now, how many pods we have for that service? How many pods we have for this service as of now? 2. Suppose I'm intentionally deleting one of the pod. Let's say I'm intentionally deleting one of the pod. I'm intentionally deleting one of the pod. But still, since I have multiple services, I mean to say multiple pods, since I have multiple pods, I'm intentionally deleting one of the pod. Do I have one more pod to serve the traffic when replication controller is going to recreate this one? But till the replication controller recreate this one, do I have a one more pod available to serve my traffic? Now is my application is down? Is my application is down? Since I have multiple replicas, is my application is down? Is service is routing the traffic to another pod which is healthy? that Kubernetes service is routing the traffic to the pod which is healthy. Now, again, in the background, does replication controller replicated that pod again? Yes. So there is a service. Service is routing the traffic to your pods, right? Now replication controller replicated. Suppose I created a replication controller. Will I able to scale up, scale down my replicas? Now I don't want 2 replicas. Let's say I want only 1 replica, or I want 3 replicas. Will I able to scale up, scale down my replicas now? Now I don't want 2 replicas. Let's say I want to have only 1 replica, or instead of 2 replicas, I want to have 3 replicas. Is it possible to scale, replicate your pods? Yes. So how can I do that? Can I update my manifest file and apply again? Something like this. Can I update this manifest file, replicas as 3, and can I apply again? Now, how many replicas I have? How many replicas I have? 3. 3 replicas. Is it possible to do via commands also? Instead of YMLs, I want to scale up, scale down. We can do this kubectl scale. There is a command called kubectl scale. What you want to scale? What I want to scale? I want to scale RC, replication controller. Which replication controller? This replication controller. Hyphen replicas 1. So now kubectl scale hyphen replicas. Kubectl scale RC hyphen replicas. Now, as of now, what is the desired number we have? What is the desired number we have? 3. Now, when I execute this number, this command, desired will be updated as what? When I execute this command, after executing this command, desired will be updated as what? 1. So, if desired is 1, is it going to scale down? Is it going to remove some parts, extra parts? Is it going to delete those extra parts? Yes. Now, there is a typo, kubectl. Why I am getting this error? Now tell me. Namespace. In which namespace I have this replication controller? In test namespace. Now if you see how many replicas I have after executing this command? 1. Now, is my application available? I have 1 replica. Still I am able to access. Now, if I have only 1 replica, let's say that pod is having some issue. I'm intentionally deleting that pod. So I'm intentionally deleting this pod. I have only 1 pod, 1 replica. Now, for some time, is my application down now? Is my application down for some time? It is down. My application I am not able to access. But after some time again, is my application is back? Is my application is back after some time? Because we have only 1 replica. That replica has some problem. Does again that replica has been recreated? I mean to say rescheduled. Does replication controller is making sure that is it going to maintain always the given number of replicas? Yes, but in real time, are you going to have only 1 replica for your applications in Kubernetes? In real time, are you going to have just only 1 pod, 1 replica? No. you will have at least 2-3 pods, minimum 2-3 pods. 2 pods also fine. At least 2 pods, minimum 2 pods at least. And again, maximum that depends on what? Maximum that depends on what again? Can I say always you will have 4 pods, or can I say always you will have 6 pods, like that? Can I say any number? That depends on the load, that depends on the traffic to that application. That depends on the load on that application. You can have a number of replicas. Now, if I delete the replicas, this replication controller completely, is it going to delete the parts which is associated for that, which is managed by that? Now, if I am deleting, this RC, is it going to delete the parts which is associated, I mean to say, which is managed, which is created by this replication controller? Yes. Now, if you see, I deleted RC. Is it deleted that parts also, whatever is managed by that replication controller? I have not deleted service. Service is still there. But does service have any endpoints now? Does service has any endpoints now? Service is still there. Service is still there. Now, request is going to service. Request is going to service. But why this is not working? Why we are getting connection refused? No endpoints, right? Now, we have scaled here. What type of scaling I have done here, guys? What type of scaling I have done? I scaled up, scaled down. What type of scaling I have done? Is it auto scaling? Is it manual scaling? Is it auto scaling? Is it manual scaling? Manual scaling. As I already told in the Kubernetes, can we do the auto scaling? Does parts can be increased and decreased based on the load? Yes, we can auto scale our pods in Kubernetes using one concept called pod autoscaler. There is one concept called pod autoscaler. There is one HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler. We'll discuss this later, not now. Okay. So if I have this HPA created, if I have a horizontal pod autoscaler created for that applications, based on the CPU, based on the memory utilization, based on the CPU, based on the memory utilization, the parts will be adjusted. The number of replicas will be adjusted based on the CPU, based on the memory utilization. This we will discuss later, not now. First of all, focus what is pod at least. Now, service is still there. Parts are not there. That's why I'm not able to access my application. Now, I'm trying to apply again that manifest. There is no change in the service. Service is already there. So that's why what it is saying, service, is it saying created or is it is saying unchanged? Since there is a service already, nothing is updated in the service resource. It is unchanged. Since I deleted RC, then when I am applying again, is it saying created? Yes. Now, again, how many endpoints I have? How many endpoints I have for my service now? Which means how many pods I have for that service? If you see how many pods I have for that service, how many pods? 3. How come 3? Because in my manifest, did I mention replicas as 3? In my manifest, did I have replicas as 3? Do I have replicas as 3 in my manifest? Yes. Now, is service is making discovery? Is Kubernetes having a service discovery load balancing concept with the help of service? Is Kubernetes service is identifying pods wherever it is running in the cluster? It doesn't matter in which node it is running in the cluster. Is it able to identify where your pods are running, and is it doing the load balancing, that service, Kubernetes service? So if any other applications also using service names, do they need to change the code whenever pods are deleted, recreated? If pods are changing, if pod IPs are dynamic, if they are using service names within the cluster, one application want to talk to other application, if they are using service names instead of pod IPs, do they need to modify their code and redeploy if they are using just service names? Not required, right? So service will identify the pods and it will route the traffic. Now, the way we have a replication controller, we can create a replica set also. Now, this Python application also, I don't want to create a directly pod. Can I create a replication controller for those pods also? Instead of having this application as a pod, can I have this also as a replication controller, so that pods will be managed by that respective replication controller? Yes. So let me do that. Now I don't want to have this as a pod. I don't want to create directly pod. Can I say something like this? Replication controller. So these labels now, this name, these labels are for what? As I already told, all this metadata is for your, replication controller. Now here we have a selector, we have replicas, we have template. Under template, can I have metadata? Pod metadata, and again spec, under template. So now these containers will be under that pod template spec. Now metadata, here name. Even though you give some name here, it won't be used, right? Labels are very, very important here. App, Python app. So here selector, can I give those app, Python app? Because this replication controller will use these selectors to manage, but it is not mandatory for replication controller. Now replicas 1. Now with this information, how many pods will be created and managed by this replication controller now? This replication controller 1. Now there is a service. Service is already there. Does this service will identify the pods again based on the selectors? Service is already there. I am not changing anything in the service. Now, if I have 2 replicas, now how many pods will be created for this? With this template, how many pods will be created? 2. Now this service will have how many pods? In that case, it is going to find 2 pods with these labels. So 2. Now one more thing I wanted to tell you. What is my cluster capacity? How many nodes as of now we have? How many nodes we have as of now in my cluster? Total 3. Master, one master, and 2 workers. By default, is our pods, whatever we deployed or we are going to deploy so far, is our pods are getting scheduled in the master? Whatever we deployed, our own pods, or whatever we are going to deploy, is it getting scheduled in the master? If you observe, let me show that. So as of now, we have 3 pods for this, right, in this namespace. If you see, is these pods are running in the master? These pods are scheduled in the master. So this is the master node 88. If you see, is it running in the master 88? No. By default, pods are not scheduling in the master. I will tell you later why pods are not scheduled in the master. There is a concept that I will cover later. Now I am trying to deploy this Python application also. So 2 replicas. Will those also will be scheduled in the workers only? Will those also will be scheduled in the workers only? Now, what is the capacity of each worker? What is the capacity of each worker? 1 core CPU and 1 GB RAM. So if I keep deploying lot of applications, will my cluster will be able to sustain, or my clusters will break? I mean to say, do I have issues? Will I face issues with my Kubernetes machines? Does Kubernetes machines will go down if I keep deploying lot of applications without having a resources? Your Kubernetes nodes will go down. So when you are practicing, try to deploy very less applications and delete existing applications and deploy new applications. Otherwise, you take very high configuration server. Now, I think I am okay, at least for 5 pods. Already 3 pods are running, and I am going to deploy 2 more pods. And also in the background, do we have some Kubernetes pods running? VNet pods, kubeproxy pods. These pods also running in the Kubernetes workers in the background. So these are also running. I think I am okay now. Let's see. I am deploying that Python application. Now, in that namespace, I have total 5 pods. In that namespace, I have total 5 pods. Now, if you see, these 2 pods is managed by whom? These 2 pods are managed by whom now? Now, how many replication controllers I have? How many replication controllers I have in this namespace? 2 replication controllers. So who is managing these pods? These 3 pods, whatever I have highlighted, who is looking after those 3 pods? This replication controller. And who is looking after these pods? This replication controller. Now, this replication controller. To access these applications, do I have a service? To access these pods? Now, if you see, let me get the endpoints and show you. Now, this Python service has how many endpoints? We created a service. Basically, service will have endpoints. That's it. I have not explicitly created endpoint. We just created a service. Service has a endpoints. This service has how many endpoints? Endpoints are nothing but your pods. Do you see? Is this service is going to route the traffic to this pod 10.10.36.0.2? What is this 10.36.0.2? What is that here? Your pod IP. This is one more 10.44.0.3. What is that? That is again another pod IP. But I have 5 pods. But why this service is not having these pods as endpoints? Why this Python service is not having these pods as endpoints, or vice versa? Why this Java service is not having these pods as endpoints? Because this is different application. This is different application. Does it have its own labels and selectors? Does it have its own labels and selectors? Yes. It has its own labels and selectors. Now, if anything goes wrong with these pods, does this replication controller will take care? If anything goes wrong with these pods, this replication controller will take care. If say anything goes wrong with this pod, this replication controller will take care. Now, let's say this application want to communicate with this application. Can they use this service name? Vice versa. This application want to communicate with this applications. This application want to communicate with this application. Can they use these services? Since service has multiple endpoints, will it act as a load balancing round robin fashion within the cluster? Does it matter for this application where this pod is running? What is the pod IP? In which node it is running? Does it matter? So it doesn't matter for this, right? So each microservice can be deployed as what? Each microservice will be Docker image. Can I deploy the Docker image as a pod in Kubernetes if I am using Kubernetes? Pod. Now, only one pod or multiple pods? Multiple pods. Are we going to directly create a pods for each microservice, or are you going to have some controller like this? Maybe I can use for each microservice, I can create a deployment, or I can create a replication controller. I can create a deployment, I can create a replica set, or I can create a replication controller, some controller. Now, if I don't have enough resources, will I able to keep deploying lot of pods? In my cluster, I don't have lot of CPU, lot of memory. Will I able to keep deploying n number of pods, n number of applications without having enough nodes and CPU memory? Your cluster will break, right? You need to have enough resources. Now, suppose I have one application. Can I have all those application related microservices in one namespace? Suppose Flipkart, end user that has lot of microservices. Can I have all those microservices, services, deployments, replication controllers created in some namespace? Do I need to create a separate namespace for each microservice? Do I need to have a separate namespace for each microservice? No. All related microservices which belongs to one applications, you can have it in one namespace. So clear what is namespace, what is controller, what is pod, what is service, whatever we have discussed so far. Is everyone clear? Apply the knowledge. Don't blindly execute the commands, right? Understand what is namespace, why we are using namespace. Understand what is service, why we are using service. Don't blindly execute. So Balaji sir has given these nodes. So let me take this, apply, execute this command, execute next command. Don't do that. Understand what is that. Okay, that is how you should learn. Now, what is replica set? How different it is from replication controller? What is daemon set? How different it is from other two? What is deployment? Why we have to use deployment? Slowly you will understand. Okay. So tomorrow I'll continue. Tomorrow I will explain what is this replica set, what is this daemon set, what is this deployment. Okay. I'll explain tomorrow so that you can decide which one we can use based on the requirement. As I already told, which is the most widely used in Kubernetes is basically this one, deployment. Why? What are the drawbacks of replica set replication controller? I will explain when I go for a deployment. Okay. So tomorrow we'll understand all these things, guys. Shiva is asking same question, sir. In replication controller, we are specifying as 2. If I have a multiple containers, how come 4 containers are created? Where are we specifying? Containers will be managed by whom? Containers will be created and managed by whom? Containers are wrapped under which? Containers are wrapped under which? Containers are wrapped under pod. Pod. So pods are managed by whom? Now RC. So if I want to have a 4 containers in one pod, again, I already told here. When I am creating a replication controller, can I have something like this? All those 4 or whatever, can I have under my pod template like this? Under my pod template. Now, if I say here 2 and here I have 4 containers. So how many pods will be created and each pod will have how many containers? Now here I have given as 2. How many pods will be created? 2. And each pod will have how many containers? Each pod will have how many containers if I have something like this? 4. I already told single container pods, multi-container pods. What is single container pod? What is multi-container pods? We already discussed. Clear, Shiva? How to create multiple containers in a single pod? How to create multiple pods using these replication controllers? Okay. So that's it for today, guys. Tomorrow, I will explain what is replica set, how different it is from replication controller, what is this daemon set, what is this deployment. We'll understand tomorrow. Service. Naresh is asking end user will access, how end user request will reach to the Kubernetes pod. For internal communication or external communication, how we are exposing our pods within the cluster or outside the cluster, how we are exposing those pods, how we are accessing those pods within the cluster or outside the cluster, what concept we are using. Using service, right? Using service. Within the cluster, we are using cluster IP service. Outside the cluster, we are exposing node port, but in the real time, it is different. I will explain that later. In the node port, we are not going to use, end users will not use node port, because does end users will access like this, the ports in this range? Does they use port like this? In the end user, do they use IPs and ports like this? DNS, right? So there will be a load balancer, external load balancer, which will sit outside of your Kubernetes. End user request goes to the load balancer, then load balancer will route the traffic to Kubernetes nodes on that node IPs and node ports. That I will explain when we go for this service of type load balancer. We have a service of type load balancer, right? We'll go there. Chandan is asking, sir, can you explain selector? What is selector? What is label? In Kubernetes, here I have given the document. I am not sure whether you went through this document or not. In Kubernetes, one Kubernetes object needs to find another Kubernetes object. In Kubernetes, one Kubernetes object need to find another Kubernetes object. What it will use? It uses a concept of labels and selectors. Labels are key value pairs attached to the object. Labels are key value pairs attached to the object. That can be for any object. Can I add a labels for pod? Can I add a labels for service? Can I add a labels for RC, RS, node, deployment, anything? Labels are key value pairs which can be attached to any object. Then one object has to find other objects. Can I use those labels as a selectors? Can I use those labels as a selectors to find those objects? Now let's take this example. We have a pods. We have a pods. How service is identifying the pods? How service is identifying the pods? So pod has a label. In service, did I give those labels as a selector? Pod has a label. Did I give those labels as a selector in my service so that service is identifying these pods with those selectors? Selectors are like a conditions, query. Query, you are querying something, right? Kubernetes, one object has to find another object. We can use a concept of labels and selectors. Labels are key value pairs which you can attach to the pods. We can use those labels as a selectors in other resources. Like, is service is using selectors? Is service is using those pod labels as a selectors to identify the pods? Yes. Bhanuchandra is asking, sir, if you specify all the containers are 80/80, how does the load balancing? First of all, you asking this question, Bhanuchandra. Yesterday I told, can I have multiple containers on a same port in that pod? Before you ask this question, you should think about pod. Can I have multiple containers? Can I have 2 containers in this pod on 80/80? Before you ask this question, you should thought of pod. Yesterday I told, can we have multiple containers in one pod with same port? Then do you get that use case? Do you have that use case, whatever you asked? Do you have that kind of a requirement, that type of use case to create a service? Clear now your question? Okay. Any other questions, guys, before I start the session for today? Kubernetes is very, very important, and also I'm trying to explain at a very minute level, very, I can say, like, I am going very deep in Kubernetes, which is not required, but you should know what is happening in the background. You should not think as some magic. Sir, how come parts are coming? Parts are deleted automatically, it is coming. You should not think as a magic. There is some code, there is some piece of logic which is looking after each other, right? You should not think there is some mantra in Kubernetes, automatically parts are coming, even though I'm deleting. There is no mantra, there is no power. Everything is a code, everything is a logic. So we are trying to go inside Kubernetes and understand what is what, who is looking after each other. Unless until you practice all these things, you cannot remember. Okay, so try to practice, try to do the assignments, whatever is given, so that it will be easy for you to understand. Thank you, guys. I'll continue tomorrow. Shiva is asking, I have mentioned 3 replicas and each having 2 containers. Yes, man. I don't know whether you guys understand English or not. Or I need to teach mathematics. Huh? Now, here I have 3 pods. Here I have 2 containers. So how many pods? And each pod will have how many containers? How many pods I will have if I have something like this? 3 pods. Each pod have how many containers? Each pod has how many containers if I have something like this? This is not possible. I need to have it on a different port. Okay, that is different. How many containers I will have? I mean to say each pod will have how many containers? 2 containers. Then total containers, if you ask me, then 6. But does Kubernetes manages the pod directly? Does Kubernetes manages the containers directly? Can we create a containers directly in Kubernetes? No. Kubernetes will not directly manage the containers. Kubernetes will create a pods. Who will manage or who will look after your containers? The pods. Pod will have a containers. Like you are packing your containers into a pods. You are packing your container into a pods. So that's what. Unless until you create and you practice, there will be a lot of confusion. So unless until you create and practice, there will be a lot of confusion. Once you practice, it will be easy. Okay. Okay, guys, I'll continue tomorrow. Uh, if you have any questions, any queries while practicing, post your questions in the Skype group. Whenever I see some messages based on my availability, I'll reply. Okay. Thank you, guys. I'm stopping the session. We'll see you tomorrow.